Trump is turning up the heat, slapping tariffs and sanctions on India for its Russian ties. But how will India battle these threats? The country has faced pressure before and found ways to protect its interests. Yet, this challenge feels sharper. Defense deals, energy security, and global credibility all hang in the balance. As External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar is to meet his counterpart Sergey Lavrov in Moscow, the stakes are sky high. Can India navigate Washington's wrath, defend its autonomy, and emerge stronger, or will Trump's threats force difficult compromises? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. This isn't India's first sanction storm. Washington once forced New Delhi to cut Iranian oil before grudgingly granting a waiver for Chabahar port given its strategic importance. India insists it does not recognize country-specific sanctions, yet it repeatedly finds itself cornered. Unlike Iran, Russia is central to India's defense and energy. A new tariff war, oil pressure, and threats of secondary sanctions now hang over India-US ties. Will Jaishankar's Moscow mission offer a shield or deepen the storm? India has long maintained that it does not accept country-specific sanctions. This principle was tested in the Iran case, where New Delhi first lost access to discounted oil, then scrambled for waivers. And then it secured an exception for the Chabahar port, only to eventually stop importing Iranian crude under relentless US pressure. The irony was striking. India kept saying it would not bow, but the reality of energy security and diplomatic costs forced a retreat. Now the same cycle looms, but with far higher stakes. Unlike Iran, where oil was the main factor, India's ties with Russia cut to the bone of its military and energy security. 60 to 70% of India's hardware comes from Moscow: fighter jets, submarines, and the coveted S-400s. On top of that, Russia has emerged as one of India's top oil suppliers, accounting for more than a third of crude imports. This is no side deal. This is the core. How can India simply walk away? In August 2025, Trump escalated the war of nerves with one of the harshest economic moves against India in modern memory: a sweeping 25% tariff on Indian exports. Later, doubled to 50%, specifically citing Russian oil imports, was unleashed. For a country whose economic planners depend heavily on US markets, this was a gut punch. Nearly 70% of India's exports to America are suddenly at risk, and the ripple effect is enormous, from farmers to IT firms to small manufacturers. But it wasn't just tariffs. Trump administration dangled the specter of secondary sanctions, the same sword once swung over Iran. The warning was clear: trade with Russia and risk losing access to the dollar system and US financial networks. New Delhi's response was bold in public, denouncing the move as unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. Officials repeated India's mantra: no recognition of extraterritorial sanctions.
We have not yet seen any actions by the UK insofar as matters related to secondary sanctions, etc. are concerned. In any case, we have made very clear our view with regard to secondary sanctions. I think what you are pointing to in terms of the recent announcement by the European Union, we have been very clear that insofar as energy security is concerned, it is the highest priority of the government of India to provide energy security for the people of India, and we will do what we need to do with regard to that. On energy-related issues itself also, as we have said previously, it is important not to have double standards and to have a clear-eyed perception of what the global situation is insofar as the broader energy market is concerned, and where the providers of energy goods are located and where they're going to come from, and who needs energy at what point in time. I think these matters are not appreciated sufficiently. We do understand that there is an important and a serious security issue that is confronting Europe, but the rest of the world is also there and is also dealing with issues that are existential for the rest of the world. And I think it's important to keep balance and perspective when talking about these issues.
Yet behind closed doors, murmurs of private flexibility surfaced. Could India hold firm or would cracks appear again? This is where the Jaishankar-Lavrov meeting takes center stage. The agenda is thick with urgency. Energy, defense, payments multipolarity, all are on the table. With Trump tightening the screws, India and Russia are working overtime on payment systems, rupee-ruble trade, non-dollar settlements, mechanisms to bypass US financial choke points.
When it comes to our procurement of oil from Russia, we have to bear in mind that there were certain market conditions which were created. At that point of time, in fact, USA also encouraged India to source oil from Russia, and some of the finished products after processing of crude oil was willingly bought by European countries. So, in fact, we helped in maintaining stability in global oil market. The US position had changed now. There is pressure on us. We are dealing with the situation, but as Prime Minister has mentioned, we will not sacrifice certain key interests we have in trade negotiations, for instance, interests of farmers, of our dairy industry. When it comes to procurement of oil, again, this is not something there will be a knee-jerk reaction from India in terms of suspending procurement. As it is, the premium available on Russian origin oil discount which is given is much less now. There might be market factors guiding us to reduce procurement. I don't know. But I would not like to use language like defiant. But basically we need to ensure our interests.
For Moscow, the stakes are just as high. Deputy Chief of Mission of Russia in New Delhi, Roman Babushkin, has already offered India a lifeline.
If the Indian goods are facing difficulties entering the US market, the Russian market would welcome Indian imports to the most extent possible. So don't worry about that. So as far as energy is concerned, indeed, we see that actually that would be quite detrimental to the global economic stability and energy security. As we discussed before, Russia is the largest producer of oil. India is the largest consumer. Any kind of unilateral actions lead to disruptions in supply chains, leads to imbalance in pricing policies. So it would potentially lead to price hikes and destabilization of global markets and endangering energy security of developing countries, first of all.
That's not rhetoric, it's a signal. The partnership is being framed as a rejection of Western double standards, a phrase Jaishankar has echoed repeatedly. If Europe can buy Russian gas while wagging fingers at India, why should New Delhi fold? The Moscow talks will send a message not just to Washington, but to the world. The ghosts of Iran loom large. When America reimposed sanctions after walking out of the nuclear deal, India initially stood tall. Officials thundered that unilateral sanctions had no legitimacy. But reality crept in fast. Iranian oil, once discounted and vital, was phased out of India's energy mix. The much-touted non-recognition policy shrank in the face of secondary sanctions. Yet India won a waiver for Chabahar because it served US interests in Afghanistan. You see, back then, Biden administration wanted to keep a watchful eye on Islamabad's interference in Afghanistan. Washington needed India's support to keep Pakistan in check. But now, under Trump dispensation, the oil dried up anyway. This is the precedent haunting policymakers today. The Iran case showed that India's defiance is real in words but conditional in practice. Washington knows this, and Trump is betting that tariffs and secondary sanctions will eventually bend India's will. But here's the twist. Russia is not Iran. India was never dependent on Tehran for tanks, missiles, and nuclear submarines. With Moscow, the dependency is structural. Will India risk national security for American approval or gamble on a deeper rift with Washington? Energy first. Russia is now India's top crude supplier, accounting for tens of millions of tons annually. This reliance is not just about cheaper barrels, it is leverage. Russian oil offers India discounts, insulation from global price shocks, and bargaining power against OPEC. The US might threaten, but alternatives are costly and politically sensitive. Officials admit they can secure oil from alternative sources but quietly add at a price. That price could mean inflation, domestic anger, and electoral costs. Defense next. From Sukhoi and MiG fighters to nuclear submarines, from BrahMos missiles to the S-400s, India's military machine has Russia embedded in its DNA. The US threatened CAATSA sanctions over the S-400 deal but ultimately gave India a waiver. Why? Because Washington's China calculus demanded it. But can India expect the same generosity under Trump 2.0? If America weaponizes sanctions against Indian defense procurement, it could choke spare parts, delay upgrades, and weaken readiness. That's not pressure, it's blackmail. Here's the hypocrisy India points to at every forum. China imports even more Russian energy than India, yet Washington's pressure is nowhere near as sharp. Beijing is spared the same tariff hammer, partly because of its economic clout, partly because Washington knows threats don't translate well into leverage with a superpower rival. India, however, is seen as vulnerable, big enough to matter, small enough to squeeze. That's the double standard Jaishankar is hammering. Sanctions by convenience, not principle. This narrative matters. If the West continues to single out India while ignoring its own Russian entanglements, New Delhi can leverage the hypocrisy to rally sympathy in BRICS, SCO, and the Global South. The Lavrov meeting is not just bilateral, it's geopolitical theatre, with India painting itself as the unfairly targeted middle power refusing to kneel. Can Trump's tactics backfire, pushing India deeper into Russia's embrace? Inside India, the blowback is real. Tariffs hurt exporters, and exporters employ millions. Farmers, especially those linked to US markets, are already protesting. The opposition smells blood, accusing the government of allowing foreign pressure to dictate India's trade. Prime Minister Modi has publicly vowed not to compromise domestic welfare for short-term diplomatic expediency, declaring that India is prepared to bear significant cost. That's tough talk, but if the pain spreads across industries, the government's resolve will be tested at home as much as abroad. So what are India's options? First can be trade diversification. Economic planners are urgently scouting alternative markets, accelerating reforms, and betting on BRICS economies to absorb goods squeezed out of the US markets. This isn't easy, but the tariffs might be the shock therapy India needed to break old dependencies. Second can be payment systems. By bypassing the dollar, India and Russia aim to shield commerce from US banking sanctions. Rupee-ruble trade and non-dollar settlements could blunt Trump's sword. Third can be diplomatic hedging. India isn't abandoning the Quad or the West. It's deliberately compounding timelines. Engagements with Russia act as insurance, signaling that pressure won't isolate India. Fourth can be domestic reform. Crises push policy. The shock of tariffs could turbocharge Atmanirbhar Bharat, strengthening technological and economic self-reliance. The risks are heavy. US-India relations could sour, supply chains could stall, defense tech transfers could freeze, domestic unrest could rise. Yet, there are opportunities too.
First, Donald Trump sees himself as a kind of moderator in these negotiations. It's his point that it's not his war, it's coming from the previous reality, and he's been trying to sort it out. Secondly, he clearly understands, and he made this point a number of times, it's only about him who could bring Vladimir Putin to the table and start a real conversation. And I believe he's right here. The third point is about to figure out how we can handle any sort of further negotiations. And for me, the fundamental point, you can call it precondition, you can call it whatever you like, but the point about sustainable nature of any future ceasefire and like we wanted peace. Without this sustainability, any further conversation does not make sense. So we need to understand what the Europeans and Americans can do together with us in the sense of having security commitments, or if the best possible of worlds, security guarantees, which should deliver this sense of sustainability. And after that, any sort of further issues can be discussed. But without a sense of delivering sustainability, how can we start any credible conversation?
The squeeze could accelerate long-delayed reforms, cement Russia as a fallback partner, and showcase India's autonomy on the global stage. Sometimes, pressure forges steel. The real gamble is whether India can endure the pain long enough to emerge stronger. The Jaishankar-Lavrov meeting is not just another diplomatic handshake. It's India's line in the sand. The message to Trump is simple. India will not be dictated to. The memory of Chabahar and Iranian oil may cast doubt, but Russia is a different beast. Defense, energy, multipolarity, all are intertwined. India's strategy is clear. Project defiance, negotiate quietly, diversify markets, and buy time. Whether Trump escalates or recalibrates, New Delhi is determined to prove that its autonomy is not for sale. The battle is not just with Washington, it is with history, with the precedent of bending under pressure, with the need to define India's place in a turbulent multipolar world. So how will India battle Trump's threats? With grit, with diplomacy, with hedging, and with one principle it keeps repeating: India does not and will not recognize country-based sanctions. The fight is on. Thank you for watching Statecraft.